I can write questions down.
Amazing. And then I'll just gather people now, and then Pujita will introduce you, Gillian. And I don't know if you can see, but we're a little group of people in a little barn in the countryside. We're around 12 people today. So it's a little group, and we've been hanging out since Friday afternoon and talking about questions about how to share what we have, basically.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, so redistributing resources and working within the art world with all of the potentials, but also all the problems that come with that. We've had really beautiful and also heavy sometimes conversations. So maybe, yeah. That's
so
that's
are
a quick
most
update.
people working in are most people artists or creatives?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. But also activists. So kind of that's actually what our morning session has been about, how to kind of navigate the thresholds and intersections between art and activism.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I am gathering people now. And then, yeah, as I said, Pujita will do the formal introduction. And then we're just so happy to have you. And
same here. Great to be here.
Okay, everyone.
So it's live streaming now already?
Yes, I am live streaming, yes.
Okay, I'm just gonna go get something, so I'm gonna turn off my camera for a few seconds.
Great. Okay, when you're back, we're ready.
Okay. Okay, I'm back.
Are we ready?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll just wait 10 seconds for everyone to join. Come back.
Okay, then I will take a little longer to get a better pen. I'll be right back.
Great. Go for it. Look forward to it. Me too. Me too. Hi, Pujita. Yeah. Hey, Pujita.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, whatever.
Good morning, afternoon.
Whatever. Whatever. Good morning, Pujita.
Good morning, good morning.
So just let me know when you're ready for me to start.
We're ready now. Yeah. We're ready now, Gillian and Pujita.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I guess it's just afternoon by you all. So I want to say good afternoon, good late afternoon. It's 6 a.m. here, and I'll give you all a quick view. I'm sitting on my porch in the outskirts of Port of Spain in Trinidad. And this is our morning. So you might hear like parrots flying by, and it's a pretty lush environment, even though I'm in the capital city. So just giving you all a sense as to where I am. Fortunately, I have a little sense of Denmark because my partner is actually Danish-German, and he's been living here for 13 years. And one reason that I actually got to meet the Hosting Lands crew was because I was there, I guess, last month. Yes, mainly in rural Denmark, in Lang Lang, in southern Jutland, and a little bit in Copenhagen. So nice to meet you all, and hopefully I will get a little more information about you all as the morning wears on. So what I was asked to do when I came here today was to talk to you all a little bit about how do people get together to take some level of land-based lifestyle back? And obviously that includes that it means you have to have some sort of space for land. So I'm going to run through pretty quickly what we have done on this end to try to take charge of our space, the things that grow on our land, the relationships between us and other species of life, and I'll talk for about 25, 30 minutes, and then we'll have some time to actually have a conversation and figure that out. I am going to show some slides because it's a little, yes?
Sorry, Gillian, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I just know that Pujita would really like to introduce you, and I feel that it would be good for us to get the introduction
Yes.
first, and we also know more about
Perfect.
where you're getting from. Yeah, okay, sorry.
The stranger drops on the planet. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, okay, I could take the time and introduce Gillian. Also, I should say before I do so, I think like meeting Gillian, as just picking up from where she left, meeting Gillian during my time in Denmark when I was there the last time was actually one of the best times, also because of our shared interest in the history of chocolate and coffee and so on. And we nerded out for quite a long time. And so on. And I'm sure Gillian will get to it and to her practice soon enough. So I'll leave that to her, but I'll just like sort of give a bit of a more of a formal introduction so that people in the room who may not know who Gillian is just has a bit of a snapshot, so to say. So Gillian Goddard, a seasoned systems thinker, community organizer, and a chocolate maker, integrates food and culture to spark change. With decades of indigenous-style gardening and farming behind her, she founded the Alliance of Rural Communities, or ARC, in Trinidad and Tobago in 2014. ARC has since expanded across the Caribbean, promoting regenerative farming and sustainable rural livelihoods. In 2021, Goddard launched the Cross-Atlantic Chocolate Collective, uniting cocoa farming communities from Africa to North America in the pursuit of fair supply chains. Her work addresses power dynamics, decolonization, and emancipation through food and community narratives. Recognized with the Soul of Rurality Award by IICA in 2022. She also teaches at several academic institutions and is on the steering committee of Collective Diaspora, a global co-op of Black cooperatives. I'm sure this is a very, very short introduction to a very, very long career and decades of hard work. So, Gillian, I'll give the floor to you. You can take it from here on. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Hopefully that gives a little sense. But as you all know, as you're doing this work, what's written on a page doesn't really describe how your day actually looks. But we will maybe get to that because that tends to be something that people ask me a lot about. So what I want to do is actually, I'm going to share 2 slides to show you where we are at now with some of my community building stuff. I'm part of a team, and a team that comes, goes, ebbs, flows, grows, slightly contracts. And this is where we have actually ended up. So let me make sure I can share my screen. Yes. Okay. So in 2024, we have this network that for us looks a bit like a forest. And I'll talk a little bit about what happened when. So we have this thing called an NGO, which basically we make strategic decisions with no attachment to the structure, but looking around to see what makes sense. And so when I first started making chocolate, it was a kind of arbitrary decision. I used to have an organic shop, the first organic shop in Trinidad, not like the organic shops in Denmark. It was like a community organic shop. And I turned it into a cooperative, moved on. I'm not a shopkeeper personality. I don't like going to the same place, the same time every day. And eventually I was away from Trinidad. I moved to Hawaii, didn't want to stay there as a kind of settler. So moved back to Trinidad. And in the process of making dried bananas, I went to deliver them to the shop that I used to own and saw that all their cocoa products were imported. Now, in the 1800s, Trinidad was the 3rd largest producer of cocoa. In my primary school, we would pay 5 cents for a cocoa pod for our snack, for break time. And yet here we were with everything on the shelves imported. The Caribbean imports 85 to 90% of its food. So when tourism happens in the Caribbean, we are pretty much a selfie backdrop. People come here, they eat the same foods they eat elsewhere, and they take pictures, but our role as the Caribbean tourism destination, generally, it's not our food, it's nothing processed by us. And so it wasn't a surprise that the cocoa was all imported. Now, all over Trinidad, there were abandoned cocoa estates. It wasn't worth it financially to pick the cocoa. The beans would all be exported. I had never tasted Trinidad chocolate in my life. And so my partner and my other business partner and myself decided we were going to try to do something with cocoa. This was in 2014. So as soon as we started trying to make chocolate, which that year there'd been an innovation where a US chocolate maker had realized that dal grinders from India could be used for making chocolate. And those were costing $200. So it meant that instead of $10,000 to get into chocolate, you could get into it for $200. So we bought one of those $200 machines, and the adventure is long, so I'm not going to tell you the whole thing, but by the end of it, a few weeks later, we were making chocolate. And I called some friends of mine in a cocoa community, and I said, hear this, send 5 young adults to my house. I want to teach them how to make chocolate, because the cocoa growing communities had never made chocolate. So that's how things started. And a few months later, we decided to start an NGO. We were being erased. So we started an NGO. Then as the years went on, community chocolate companies were formed. So in other words, we taught chocolate making to communities and helped them to start their own collectives. And then we started a wholesale distribution company called IICA Enterprises to deliver the chocolate from all of these. There were at that time 3 villages that were making chocolate, and they're all widespread. So we started our own distribution company, which brought in machine parts, coordinated labels, did all of that part of things, and took things to the communities and took things from the communities. So I'm talking a bit about the transactional piece of it, but obviously that's not how it happened, right? We have the transaction happening, but we are also building relationships, seeing what needs to be done, helping each other with medical care, helping with childcare. So everything starts to connect at that point. Soon after that, we started, if you look at the lower part, ARC destinations, and that was an attempt to take what people call tourism, intersect it with chocolate, and start allowing it to happen in a way that makes sense. At the same time, we started a conservation organization because we were like, okay, we got to ground everything we're doing on a backdrop where we are actually taking care of other forms of life in addition to taking care of humans. Then we went on over the years to do craft companies in the same spots and different spots. We started a small, what we all might call like a CSA, or because cocoa grows best with other crops. So usually if we're doing a strategy, we may start with something like chocolate, but we're going to move to other things because it's not healthy to actually just do one crop. So we started a small CSA and a small group for organic farmers called a PGS system, which was started in India and Brazil, where the farmers and the community actually regulate ourselves instead of bringing in a third-party organic certifier. During COVID, what kept us alive is that tourism died. Trinidad closed its borders for 2 years. Chocolate dropped precipitously because nobody was allowed to even go to the supermarket. But this part, the ARC marketplace, actually rose up, and the exact amount of money that was made by the chocolate companies and the destinations was able to be made in the same way. So communities still got an inflow of funds, and we actually hired more people in COVID. So this, to me, then takes us back to how are we setting up our structure? So we do our business strategy looking at forest systems. We could look at healthy swamp systems. We could look at any healthy ecosystem because it's the most sophisticated resource sharing model that you will see anywhere. Humans haven't come close to setting up a sophisticated resource sharing model the way a healthy natural ecosystem does. And this was an example of it. with a diversity of different plants, when there's a drought or if there's heavy rain, some of the plants will die back and some of the other plants will come up. And that's actually what happened with us in COVID. The chocolate and tourism part contracted and the marketplace expanded to take the place. So we still had a closed canopy of activities and protection for communities because we had put other things inside. So this is what today, the final part is our co-create. And this part was an attempt to actually have more power in the national landscape. So what is this? Our co-create is a place where we sell all the products from these various spots, but we also bring together national change makers. And I'm going to show you a little Instagram of that, because and you can go and take a look at it, and it's called our Co-Create Hub. And so we have taken over a space. We have a cafe selling all our stuff. So this is a poet. So we do poetry workshops. We talk about environment stuff. This was Small Island Developing States. We make sure that in LGBTQ plus community comes through. First, I heard that a lot of you are artists, so like making a living as a creative was one workshop. So we are constantly having activities that are to do with all the different arms of activism and bringing people in to talk about things, meet each other, and to get efficient and to get effective and to not be siloing ourselves where we are limiting our power and our influence. And then the final thing I want to show you on the slides is during COVID, I started reaching out to people on the continent of Africa, which is where 70% of cocoa beans are produced, to try to share what we had learned over the last, it would have been, I guess, 7 years before that. And so we developed this structure. So we have a producer hive in a bunch of countries. This is where that is now. So Grenada, Cameroon, Nigeria, Ghana, St. Lucia, Dominica, Uganda, Tanzania, Trinidad, Malawi, Jamaica, Cote d'Ivoire. And in these countries, half of the people were actually making chocolate before, but half of them weren't. We did a self-help model. We bought small machines. We sent it to people. We taught each other on Zoom online how to make chocolate. So now we have a 700-woman cooperative in Ghana making chocolate, a supporter of cooperatives in Cameroon who supports 2,000 cooperative farmers, in Cote d'Ivoire, which is the biggest producer of cocoa in the world and has like 3 chocolate makers, even though it produces 35% of the cocoa in the world. We taught a cooperative there. And so basically we use the same model of the natural world where we have migrant species that are going in different places and taking what they're doing. So a bird, for example, might eat in one spot and spend half its life there and go somewhere else and actually lay its eggs. So none of these things that we are doing here are actually human-based thinking activities. And none of us have MBAs, none of us have marketing degrees, but we just look at, okay, that tree is marketing to a specific group of insects or birds. So all of these terms we're using in human parlance, they actually do exist in the natural world. And for us who live very heavily in the natural world, it has been a more effective way to be able to look at problems we have and try and think, what is going on here? And then look at the natural world and try and find parallels that allow us to find our way to answers. So, I mean, this is, in half an hour, I just condensed 10 years of work. Because the Alliance of Rural Communities, our first activity would have been 10 years ago. And in the midst of this, we have other things going on. I parented 2 children. I unschooled my children. And in that 10 years, I carried my parents through to the end of their life. I was able to, we acquired a piece of land. We're still paying a mortgage to try to settle a collective community. So I have 11 acres of land, of which most of it is under forest, and 3 acres of it are perennial polyculture crops. So from a distance, you don't even see that there is human farming going on there. And so I guess what I wanted, I just came from Denmark. So I saw the way that the the monoculture system is heavily established there, which I would say we had a parallel because we had a sugar industry here. And so miles and miles of Trinidad was dedicated to sugar crops, which you basically cut the whole thing down every year. We used to burn, cut, and take to factories, right? So that is still having the plantation model. And it was actually a bit surprising for me to be in a place that actually did not have plantations, probably had its own version through monarchy and so on, in which I saw a similarity to what the colonial system in the Caribbean did to our relationship with diversity in crops, inputs from in terms of fertilizers, pesticides. And I have a lot of stories that are like town mouse and country mouse stories about my time in Denmark, feeling like I had gone to town and didn't realize. If you've ever read the town mouse and country mouse story, the little country mouse goes to town thinking that it's going to be this sophisticated place, doesn't realize there's a cat there waiting to pounce on it. And there are people rushing you out of the patisserie where you're eating. So it's all of us are facing different sides of the same challenge of what has happened to our ecosystem communities and our human communities. And so that's really, we are almost at the half-hour mark in terms of the time we have together. And so I think it might be useful if you have questions about what I showed, if you want to know more about what this looks like. So, and to add to that, so when I was growing up, my grandmother migrated to the US as a domestic worker. And my father happened to work for the airlines. So I spent a lot of my childhood going and visiting what I would consider my extracted family that was all living in New York and Washington, D.C. And so over the years, and then when I was 17, I moved there, went to university there. I had gotten a green card by that point. And I spent over 17 years in the global north. Moving around the United States. I lived on both coasts. I lived in the South. And now my two children live there. They were both born there. And so I'm back to spending time there. So my experience in the global north in any depth is a US experience, which I could talk to you all for hours about the difference between a community that came from a land base, because in Europe, obviously, everybody came from land-based communities, to a settler colony, which the US is, which has its similarities and differences, but the same struggle with having healthy ecosystems. Because my body is so accustomed to healthy aged ecosystems, I have a really hard time when I'm in a place with an ecosystem that doesn't finish that for my nervous system. And when I was I teach in Vermont sometimes, and I went to Vermont and I was like, why is my body feeling so unsettled? Because there were all these trees around. And I started reading, and Vermont actually had a post-apocalyptic landscape about 75, 100 years ago, when the farmers were promised that they were not having a good time. They were very poor. They had no food to eat. And they said, oh, this sheep is going to make you do better. And everybody cut all their trees down and they put sheep on the land. And so Vermont trees are teenage trees. And so I looked up old growth, because you can do that in the US. Where is the old growth in each state? And there was none. Vermont had zero old growth. And so the challenges of damaged ecosystems, of exploitative agriculture, of artists being either commercialized or marginalized, none of these things are happening in one place anymore. Globalization is not just a commercial enterprise, it's a cultural enterprise. And so for us in ARC, in Cross Atlantic, in my personal life, in my neighborhood, being able to reform healthy communities is the key. And that means that you have to actually get the skills. It's not going to come intuitively anymore. It takes work. It takes the same amount of work you would put into your art, your craft, your cooking, your building of a house. And for us in ARC and Cross Atlantic, that's actually where our focus is. How do we make healthy communities of humans and non-humans? And that's the work that hopefully you saw a bit in the slides and that we can talk about a little bit more. So I think it would be a good time. I'm not sure how you all are mediating questions. I don't know if I can hear people from that distance. So
Thank you so much, Gillian. Thank you for a wonderful and rich presentation. I want
okay, Ida, you are breaking up a lot.
You are scrambling way too much.
you have
We're not understanding you at all.
Ida, you're just like
to
very
start with, or should
scrambled.
we open for questions in the room?
So people could come up like they did the other day.
Oh no. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
I think
this
it's
Okay, but we can hear you.
very slow. It's scrambling
Yeah.
you up on
Okay.
your end.
Okay, but we can hear you.
Okay. I think you have to come right up to the mic.
And I
See how you
can
come into
hear
the
you.
screen?
Also, now we can't see you.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Oh yeah.
But we can't
Yeah.
see you
Here,
anymore.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
We can hear, can't see
Can't see
you.
us.
We cannot see you.
I don't know why that is. They can hear us, yeah. Okay, now we switched off the camera, but you can hear us, right?
Yes, you can also put
Yes.
questions in chat if you want to, as Gillian is saying.
Okay, I will try to say it
Perfect.
first.
And
Good. Okay.
Okay, you're breaking up again. Totally.
First of all, thank you so much for the talk. And also, if you had the activities beforehand, how with time. Is it clear?
It's like coming
yeah.
in waves and patches. Yeah, it's best to write it because it's just coming in waves
So,
and patches. It's scrambling, like
we are writing.
okay, perfect. We'll wait for the questions.
Okay, do you mind turning back on the camera and then we can have the
It's
questions
not
in the
working.
chat?
I think there's some like technical error, so the camera is not working. I don't know. I don't think.
Okay, it's
Working.
back.
Okay, it's back.
We're back.
So am I writing or
Yeah, you're writing. You're writing.
Okay,
Right.
If you talk really slowly, sometimes because we have this issue sometimes, and if you talk really slowly, sometimes the data can come through, but right now it's the picture is also frozen. So it means that the YouTube will also be frozen. So it's best if you put the questions in the chat. So
Yes.
I'm seeing a question about why did I decide upon cocoa beans, but there's an and. So I can talk about the cocoa beans. So if you're starting a project like this, you need to find a product that is going to have a large enough difference between the raw material price. Okay, did we have a design plan for the ecosystem of our organization beforehand, or did it come along the way? Well, so let me answer the cocoa bean question first, because that's a little simpler. So one of the things about perennial crops is that the things that are produced by them, if you process them, you sometimes have a really long shelf life. And so with cocoa, once you process cocoa, grind it into a paste, even with or without sugar, you actually have a product that if stored properly can last for 2 to 3 to 5 years sometimes. I did a talk last night at our cafe called Chocolate as a Colonial Product. And I decided to take what I had lying around. So I've been going to chocolate festivals, and some of the chocolates there were maybe 5 years old. And yes, they were stored in either a fridge or an air conditioned room. I mean, I'm in the tropics, and the chocolates were still good. So having a product that is long lasting and durable while you figure out how to create your alternative supply chain can be super helpful. But obviously the marketplace, which is where we sell the other crops that grow with cocoa, those crops are not necessarily as durable. So this cup that I have here, it has coffee, chocolate, and sugar in it, and milk. So in this, yes, we sell milk, but we don't, our milk is fresh. And so it wouldn't be a product that we would expand in any big way, because it really should be something you're buying locally. If we're going to transport, coffee beans have some longish shelf life, and so does chocolate. So if you are thinking that you want to form a community and you want the community to be self-funded, which is what our goal was, to be able to not have to beg for grants, to not have to go to grant makers and have terms and conditions. In Trinidad, most NGOs or social groups are supported by the fossil fuel industry. We didn't feel that we could, in an ethical way, take money from a fossil fuel industry and be conservationists. It just doesn't make any sense. So we wanted to make sure that with the work we are doing, it started off as basically an accidental attempt to spread what we knew. So we were just behaving in a fairly human way without a design in place, without thinking of that I just thought I was teaching 5 young adults how to make chocolate. I, at the time, thought that the skill sharing was enough. And over the years, it has become quite clear that we threw a lot of money behind skill sharing, but the system is designed so that the people who control the growth of the product cannot participate in the supply chain. So it's a kind of naive idea that we had in the beginning, that if we just taught someone how to do this thing, that it was going to work out. But the truth is that you actually need a fair amount of access and privilege to do the initial stages of entering the supply chain. And even though my family was from a very, very vulnerable and impoverished state, a few of us had kind of made our way out. And for me, the choice was, do I take those crumbs and bribes that are offered to me to remove myself from the community? Or do I stay within my community and take the things that I'm engaged with and bring them into my community, which then went beyond skill sharing? So for example, I would go into stores that would never even take an appointment from a rural community that was making chocolate. And I would so I had my own brand first, and my brand then became the place for the risk-taking in the enterprise. It became the place where we would do risky flavors. We might experiment and develop other things. I would make money from it, so I didn't have to take money from the network. And also I would take it into these elite stores and they would accept my brand. And then I would say, hey, I have these other brands. And then I would bring the village brand, because they wouldn't take that brand in the beginning. So you have to learn to strategize, and then that becomes a design plan. So now we have enough of a design plan. I have enough experience doing this type of design plan. I know when to listen to my body, which is a very sophisticated instrument that gives you a lot of information if you don't have trauma in the way. and then allow that to direct us in a particular direction, because the design is always unfolding. If you have a fire that destroys a whole place, or Vermont, for example, where they cut all the trees down, there's a sequence of activities that happens to build that forest back. So the design plan, if you pay attention to it, if you work on human supremacy, which all of us suffer from, thinking that we are superior to other forms of life, but if instead you allow yourself to learn from the other forms of life, the design that is inherent will be able to be observed by you and translated into the human language. I don't know if I'm talking about something that feels really far for some of you all, or if it's something that we've all experienced this, right? In childhood, children come in without the trauma of a lot of preconditioned understandings of how to move around, and will often move around in a way that reflects the design without even consciously necessarily thinking about it. So spending time observing young people, what do they do? What do they do when they enter a room? How do they go into a playground? What forms of curiosity? So not only human supremacy we have to push out of the way, but we have to push out of the way all the forms of supremacy. In myself, I've had to move colorism, because I actually have skin color, hair texture privilege, and that did not allow me to look in a neutral way at the world around me. I had to move my adultism, because that did not allow me to move through the world observing what I needed to observe in order to then take in information, filter the information in a way that those types of filters were not in the way, and then come out with an output that reflected what had gone in, what had digested inside of me, and what is now coming back out in ideation form. It's really challenging to know if at a distance we are connecting on what I'm saying, because I know it can seem really theoretical, and it's not theoretical for us at all. It's very, very gut-based almost. So, for example, when I come to a place like Lang, and there are these fields of monoculture with little forested areas between, I would look at something like that, digest it. How is this feeling? Now, my colonial lens, I was taught to look at those landscapes as the ideal landscape, that the tropical landscape with chaos and diversity was not the ideal landscape. I was taught about birds that existed in the global north in England that we didn't even have here. Like, we didn't even know what birds we had here. We were taught about the song of the lark and the raven's wingspan. And we don't have ravens. We don't have larks. We don't grow wheat. And most of our food has wheat in it. So that lens had to be gradually pulled away. And that, I think, is partially the role of the artist, is to see beyond what your senses are telling you. And that's part of what we as an organization are supporting, by making sure we have space for artists to be able to dare, to be able to also work inside the collective, to make money in ways where they can then express their art without feeling the pressure of the commercial world. And so yes, we had inherent design understandings, because all humans do, but we had to remove some of the filters. At least I did. In a space where people are growing cocoa, they don't have as much damage in terms of the environment around them. They have grown up in a polyculture food forest. And so their understandings of the world are a little different, but I was educated highly in a civilized environment where the goal is human rules and not land-based rules. So to see that system, I had to remove many of the filters that were in front of me. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much. Gillian, can you hear me now? Can we take
Perfectly.
questions? Yeah, great. Okay, do we have any other questions in the room? Yeah, Sandy.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
interested. Hi, I'm Sandy, coming from Palestine. We too actually we are an art collectors that decide to build our NGO in Palestine, and we are still operating from in and out as an NGO. And I'm a little bit, I identify with many things that you said, but I'm a little bit curious if you are considering yourself artists in what you are doing through your NGO, so actually hacking the system of and creating all that as a way of processing art. And you spoke about actually relation with artists, where that is taking place. Do you have like an art residency? Do you meet, you connect with other artists, or did I understood wrongly? Because I don't know that much. So I was very curious to understand dynamics around your practice and the NGO in terms of human relations.
Right. Yes, I can answer that. Now, so I'm going to go from now backwards a little bit. So right now, what do we have that if we were to think about artists, right? Like what's the difference between an artist and a farmer, or because in our collective, we have to think through some of those things a bit. And if we think about in our space, our farmers are working with seed material that often will grow and evolve together with the farmer in a very processual form, and you never come to the end of it, right? In our art engagement inside our space, so we have art and craft. So for example, on a Sunday, we have Skillshare Sunday in our cafe. And so a guitarist came and said he would like to teach people how to play the guitar, and you pay as you can. So, and we also will have a crochet circle next week, and we have somebody who's teaching people to build with pallets, all in our cafe. So the cafe space has an engagement with non-farmed products, with products that are much more in the hands and the evolution of humans, if that's the way your art runs, than our spaces in rural spaces. In the rural space, we may do certain practices of art, but we are digging a little deeper into the source of the materials. So in the rural spaces, we are investigating the dyes that people used, because the rural spaces with cocoa in Trinidad, the people are usually mixed African and indigenous, which means our indigenous people, we are swimming distance from Venezuela. So our indigenous spaces in Trinidad would have people who were from lineages from indigenous people of Venezuela who came together with African people. And we even have a word for that mixture. And so in those spaces, there were traditions of utilization of natural materials to produce things that could then be used to provide sensory stimulation and to lead to questions, which to me is where art and craft often evolve. And so we, in those spaces, we are looking a bit more at the material part of it. Whereas in the cafe space, at this point, we're not questioning the materials as much, which is a little unsettling for me, because we are buying paints that are coming from overseas. All of our art is imported, the materials. Everything is imported. Everything is great, big commercial. Our guitars are imported. The only instrument we have that's a local instrument is the steel pan. And so in the cafe space, we're not interrogating the material as much, but we are interrogating the way that society has pushed out the people who ask the early questions. And that often are the people in the art spaces. So for example, we had an art exhibition a few weeks ago, but the person explores she's bipolar, and her exhibition was called Big Feelings. And so in the exhibition, she would come and talk to people about that. So it was an intersection of art and mental health and feminism, where we are a bit different from the galleries in Trinidad, where they are specialized in mainly visual art, and they are talking about it with a rule of the market that's a little different. I mean, if you're an artist, you know how that works, right? So there is this very tense relationship between what am I trying to do and how can I live? And that's why we had that conversation about making a living as a creative. And we had practitioners, we had theater practitioners, we had painters, we had poets talking about how have we survived in this hostile place towards formal art that has almost zero grants, very little of a commercial market. How can you express your ideas which can help create change in a place that has no institutional support for artists? And how can we, as the Alliance of Rural Communities, engage with that creative sector? Because without that, we know that our attempts to dramatically change the supply chain are not going to find a fertile ground. That we need to support the things, including the creative sector, that creates a fertile ground for the changes that we are attempting to make that do not have fertile ground right now, that are opposed, that are ignored, that are not funded. And there is no separation of the way that an artist works in our society in creating that fertile ground and the fact that we need to be planted inside of it. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but in an ideological fashion, we don't see a separation between what we do as farmers, gardeners, chocolate makers, and the role of an artist. It may simply be that there is a continuum of people who are embedded in a particular way of thinking that's slightly different than what we may be embedded in, but we don't know. We are still asking that question, but we are trying to create a space where the two people who work behind the cafe counter, they both are artists in the rest of their time. And they're inside of a space where ideas are now being talked about that they never heard. The person who runs the collective most of the day, we had a poetry workshop yesterday. She came in. While the poetry workshop's going on, she sits in the poetry workshop. Her mother actually is a full-time writer. So we haven't found it easy to separate and silo the creative arts in our society from what we think of as the more practical tasks of life. And so we are trying to make sure that the room is there for the creative expression instead of us having to fight to make a living. And we want to support the creative impulse in everyone who walks through our door, whether you become a professional artist or someone who is doing art without attaching it to finance and your cost of life. So that's a big question. It's a big question, but we do think that that impulse of curiosity has been severely squelched in our communities. When we do talks, nobody asks questions. It's in Trinidad, it's very, very hard. I have rules in my conversations in order to get people to say something, because people have been so silenced. So yesterday when I did that talk on chocolate as a global colonial product, there were about maybe 14 people there. And there was one person who kept talking and nobody else did. So in a space like that, I have actually had to create rules to allow the creative impulse to come out of people's mouths. How do you string these words together, right? And so nobody can speak 3 times before everybody speaks once, or keep going around the table to ask people. So the creative impulse and the life of a technical artist, there is a continuum, and we are trying in our spaces to support it in a strong and heavy way so that we can ensure that all the parts of the continuum are filled. So, I mean, I can give more details if you want. We have tried residencies, what people call residencies, but I mean, we are in villages, right? And so if somebody has come out of a kind of middle-class tradition with art and they're accustomed to a certain lifestyle, this is not a space where they're going to be interested in living. You know, lizards running around the house and tarantulas sometimes, and electricity going and bad internet, and the people in the community around may not be comfortable talking, and a certain use of perhaps alcohol, a different perception of the gender roles. So, you know, it's something that we are looking at, because we haven't found that type of education system and people who've come out of it necessarily meld totally well without a certain amount of understanding in the spaces where the farming is happening. But it is something we are working on. Many of us have found our way back to ourselves. We were put inside of that elite educational environment, and we have gradually found our way back to a certain comfort with a lifestyle that doesn't necessarily appear that way. So a long answer to a very complex and beautiful question that I think would be worth like a few hours of talk and discussion and a practice of how do we solve this. And thank you very much for your question.
Any other questions? No?
Yeah.
We have one more question coming here, Gillian.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, perfectly.
Yep. Cool. Hi, thank you for your presentation and your all the details that you share with us. I'm Morten, an artist working with a part of my practice is working with polycultural plants, ecologies, and forestry as a counter narrative to the monocultural landscape that is surrounding us. And I'm just curious about, as you started with the mapping out of the condition of your organization at the moment, but I'm curious about the starting point. Did you start with existing plantations of chocolate, or did you start with planting? I'm just curious about how the process was initiated from an ecological perspective. Does it make sense?
Right. Yes,
Yeah, and
perfectly.
also
and mhm.
yeah, and also the others that is a part of your organization that you collaborate with. Did they also have existing plantations, or did they try to, yeah, is it started from scratch or existing ecological system that you unfold your visions from?
Right.
Yeah.
So there is even though Trinidad is a tiny country, I mean, it's 1.4 million people, so about the size of Copenhagen in terms of population. There's a lot of diversity. The population is 40% of Indian heritage from India, because after enslavement ended, we had boats that brought people to basically break the back of labor, of Black emancipated labor. And so we figured out how we can live together. We have also populations from multiple spaces that have participated in this space. And so it means that our communities vary a fair amount from one community to the next. The communities in which we happen to have ended up, that you're not going to be for everybody, right? Like everybody is not going to synchronize with what you're doing. And the communities that have synchronized the best with what we're doing have tended to be what in Trinidad, we have a word called coco payo, coco Espanol, which means cocoa people who are generally indigenous, Black, and sometimes have Spanish lineage also. Those are the communities that have grown heavily around cocoa, that have taught skills over hundreds of years. And then we also have communities that are 100% Indian that work with cocoa, right? We have tended to be in the cocoa payo communities. And in those communities, many of the people do not own any land. It seems inconceivable that you will drive to a village in the middle of a mountain and that the people in the village do not own any land, that the land around is owned by people who live in the capital. And the people who live in the village, we have a lot of squatting rights here. So it means that they can take over a piece of land that belongs to the government. But in general, when we first started, the people in our groups, because this is who we have chosen to engage as groups with each other, did not really own much land. They worked on land. And so our chocolate production spaces, tiny little spaces, generally inside of a government-owned building, are the people who work the land, but they're not the people who own the land. And so as chocolate companies, we are actually buying beans from the people who own the land, but in general, they wouldn't have been able to take the beans themselves because they rely on the community to do the harvesting, to do the maintenance, to do everything else. So this has been a particularly important thing because if you don't own land, but you're the one with all the expertise, how do you utilize this expertise rather than the landowner using all of your expertise? So it's a very interesting arrangement because sometimes the person working on the land will be harvesting the beans, getting paid by the farmer to harvest, or we will be buying the beans. There's no standard, right? We work according to, just like an ecosystem works, we adjust according to the circumstances. And so in certain communities, the chocolate making is where the person has the most power over this crop that they have been farming for hundreds of years, lineage-wise. In certain other communities, there's a certain amount of land ownership. So we have had to adjust based on the community. When we started, there was cocoa all over Trinidad rotting on the trees. It wasn't worth it to harvest for either the landowner or for the person who was living in the village because selling the beans. So let me just give you a little financial thing. So selling the beans, you would make $2 US, $2 US, because Trinidad is one of the most expensive places in the world for beans. In the continent, where 70% of the beans are produced, usually the price per kilo is less than $2 US. In Trinidad, it was $3 US, and we still didn't think it was worth harvesting the beans. So, but when you process those beans, you make $40 US a kilo. So for us, that's what the colonial relationship is, that we made $3 a kilo, and Britain had Cadbury and was making 40 minimum a kilo. $40 US minimum. And that span between the 3 and the 40 is why we did this project. And in any farming community, it's part of we encourage. Process your product. And if you're not going to process it, get involved in the supply chain so that you own the cafe where your wheat is being used to make those pastries. Because the amount of money the coffee shop makes from those pastries compared to what you make from your wheat, and why you have to have such large fields of wheat, and why you have to use fertilizers and chemicals on your land, is because you don't have a cafe. And so right now we are creating toolkits. We are creating a toolkit that's almost like a franchise, just like we did with the chocolate. We have standardized stuff, a lot of standardized stuff, like a McDonald's, like a Subway, like a franchise shop, where we create systems and we share them with new groups and with each other, so that that cafe is then owned by the wheat farmer. And it means that the wheat farmer, to make the same amount of money, does not have to plant the same amount of wheat. So going back to your question, we just saw cocoa rotting, not being used, because people weren't involved higher up the supply chain. And in a sense, for an artist, in our space, where we see that happens is once your art enters the commercial world, there's a whole bunch of people that if the artists own their own gallery, it would be a very different relationship. But the artists have to learn how to be with each other. And in our space, what we do with that is we teach emotional literacy skills. We talk a lot about individualism and how that gets developed in the educational system. We talk about all of the feelings that when we pull artist groups together, everybody's like, I don't like community. I don't want to work with others. I like to be by myself. And so we have to, in our space, we are interrogating that around cocoa, around coffee, around all things in which to have power on the supply chain, you literally have to figure out ways to work together and to really keep things within your control. I don't know if that feels like an overwhelming prospect, but at some point in the future, maybe we can talk in more detail about that. I even posted about it on my page yesterday because So many people tell me community is horrible, people backstab. Well, hear this, sweetheart. The same effort you put into learning to make a painting, you need to put that into building community. You didn't drop on this planet with an understanding of how to create a sophisticated community that is able to challenge current supply chains. And so that's a big part of what in our cafe we work on with people. How do you yourself work in a polyculture system of humans? So I would love to see more of the work of everybody who's here. I hope I get like links to websites or Instagram. Super interested in both the first speaker and the community in Palestine and the second questioner with the polyculture way of doing art. I mean, they both are really, my brain is kind of exploding right now. So I look forward to really building community across this space here.
Gillian, thank you so much. I think our brains are also exploding, and like we will make sure to send you links, and so you can also look into the practices that are present in this room. And I'm being mindful of the time, so maybe we can just list this for another conversation, right? Because as you know, we're also gathering here in order to figure out how to be in community together, who we are in this community, what our needs are, how we share resources, but also how to common a piece of land, right? And I know you told me in our email exchange that you were also doing similar projects related to commoning land, and maybe that could be like a next conversation that we could have. I think that would be really wonderful. But also if you have any like last remarks on commoning processes and your experience with them, I think that that's something we could also, like, you could leave us with. I think that that would be yeah, really rich and interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big subject that obviously I will do you all an injustice to try to condense it too much. But so I've been kind of around the intentional community space for about, I guess, 20 years in particular. Honestly, I was trying to get out of my marriage and I hadn't been working for a while, and I was trying to figure out where could I find a safe space in the sense of a place where I could have these two young children and I could spend as much time with them as I wanted to, and I could do environmental stuff. And I was in the US at the time, and the only place that I could see that that was possible was in the world of intentional community. And so I started, I had bought an RV, a camper van, and I traveled for a year and a half with my children in the camper van. They were young, I think maybe 4 and 9 at the time, and they were gamers. So that was not an easy prospect because I had to get gaming equipment. But I drove around the US looking at different communities. Obviously for me, there was a racial component because I wanted to be in communities where Blackness was a part of it. I didn't find any, right? The communities were completely segregated. And then I started living in a little village of 300 people in the middle of the desert of far west Texas. I know this all sounds super random. And that's like how learning to flow with where the clues were taking me next. This process that there's a poem called The Golden Thread. It's like that, like following this invisible golden thread. And so I ended up in that town. And in that town, I experienced what it was like. The things I wanted from intentional community, I was more able to achieve them in that town in a this was the desert of far west Texas, a Black single woman with 2 young children in a camper van. The town was half people from Mexico because it was 20 miles from the border, about 15 kilometers. No, that would be 30 kilometers. Half ranchers, white Texas ranchers, and then a few urban kind of what we called refugees. So people who came, mainly white Americans, who left city life and came in the middle of this isolated town in the middle of the high desert of far west Texas. And because we were isolated, we had to figure out how to work with each other. There was, you know, no grocery store. You had to drive through half an hour of desert on one side and 2 hours on the other side to get to any large commercial shopping. And it was an incredible experience in how does this group that's somewhat diverse, figure out how to live together. We ended up forming a little co-op. We ended up doing a lot of things very quickly. So I would say isolated communities are some of the best that already exist, where you start to engage with the people who live there already. The kind of transition town philosophy, but it means, again, the emotional skills are key. The working on internal barriers of power and influence. And it's not impossible. I've been able somewhat to work on my colorism stuff. And so how do you utilize an intentional community and a pre-existing village to create a healthy space? As I said, there's no way we're going to be able to cover all of that in this moment, right? But I just want to leave a hint of the work is often there. In working, it's like with us, we didn't replant cocoa trees necessarily. We planted some, but there were these old cocoa trees that nobody was harvesting from. There is pre-existing riches in a lot of spaces, but you have to learn how to recognize and work with them. And if you yourself have been extracted from your community, you're going to have to also partially work through that. How do I work with these people that I have certain feelings for that are triggering uncomfortable bodily expressions for me? And instead of running away from those uncomfortable bodily expressions, how do I learn to work with bodily discomfort? And how do I utilize that to engage? I would suggest that there is a mill in Langelang that I told you there is a family there. Well, no, I didn't say that in the talk. I have an intern from Denmark now. When I was there, I met a family that's half Zimbabwean, half Black Zimbabwean, half white South African. And the children have grown up in multiple places, and they are restoring an old grain mill in Langelang, southern Langelang, and building community around it. And they're doing an amazing job. And I'm sure if you look around, you will see similar projects. So what I would say is look at what is there. Yes, I have spent a lot of time working on this, and I would love to chat some more about how do you integrate these uncomfortable bodily emotions of engaging with pre-existing community and new community. But I would say that a lot of what you are doing is so important to do, both for yourselves and for the communities that need often some brave innovators who are not held tightly by the traditions of the space. You need both of those things to intertwine, to come forward with something new. And that's, if you're an artist, you know that's what it is, right? So it's just that the emotional literacy and community building skills are critical as you move forward with that. So thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to learning more about you all and what you all are doing. And I hope that we get to engage again in the future. And thank you so much for this invitation.
Thank you, Gillian, for accepting our invitation and for sharing your words with us. They touch us deeply in this moment. So thank you so much for that. And yeah, let's give a round of applause. Thank you so much, Gillian. Looking forward to staying in contact. And best
Same
of luck.
here.
Yeah.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Gillian. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.